You'll walk away with nothing and I'll get full custody of our twin boys, my husband sneered in court, backed by 3 lawyers, a fortune. And what he believed was an ironclad prenup, certain victory was his. Then the judge unsealed the company's ownership file, read my maiden name aloud, and his empire collapsed. When my husband's lawyer said the word primary custody out loud in a courtroom full of strangers, my son Owen's hand tightened around mine so hard I felt his pulse instead of my own. I didn't flinch. I'd been waiting 3 years for this exact morning. Let me back up. The life I led him where my name is Mara Lane. For 12 years, that's the only name anyone in Fairfax County ever used for me. Before that, for 26 years, my name was Mara Winslow, a name that used to mean something in 3 states. Mostly because of a great-grandfather who'd built half the rail lines between Richmond and D.C. before anyone alive today was born. I tell you that not to brag. I tell you that because it's the reason nobody believed what I was about to do to my husband in courtroom 4. I met Adrian Hollies when I was 24, sitting in a University of Virginia computer lab at 1:00 a.m. trying to get a logistics routing algorithm to stop crashing every time it hit rush hour data. He was a business school guy, 3 years older, charming in the specific way that con men and salesmen are charming, like he already knew you'd say yes before you did. He didn't understand a line of the code, but he understood people. He looked over my shoulder at the screen full of variables and said, "This could be a company." I laughed at him. Then 8 months later, I married him. Here's the part I didn't tell anyone, not even my own mother. I built the first working version of what would become Holly's Transit Systems in the spare bedroom of our first apartment, 3 years before Adrian and I even walked down an aisle. I filed the original patent under my maiden name, Winslow, because at the time, that was simply my name. I funded the first seed round myself out of the Winslow Venture Trust, a trust my grandfather had set up that made me, on paper, an extremely wealthy 20-something who dressed like a broke grad student and drove a 2009 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it. Adrian was magnetic. He was the one who could stand in front of a room of investors and make them believe the future had already arrived. I was the one who made sure the software didn't fall over when it needed to route 4,000 vehicles at once. Somewhere around year 2, without either of us really deciding it, the story calcified. Adrian Hollies, boy genius, self-made founder. Mara was the wife, the one who apparently helped. I let it happen, that's on me. I told myself it didn't matter who got the magazine covers as long as the marriage was real. I told myself a lot of things. When the twins, Samuel and Owen, were born, I stepped back from day-to-day engineering to raise them, though I never once stepped back from the ownership structure. The trust still held 62% of the voting shares quietly through a holding entity most people at the company had never heard of and never asked about. Adrian held 18% when we married. I let him believe over time in the comfortable fiction that the company was simply his. I didn't correct him. I was tired and in love, and I genuinely thought, that a marriage meant you didn't need a scoreboard. That should have been my first red flag. Not that he was ambitious, that I was the only one keeping score in secret. The cracks. I'd been folding laundry on a Tuesday in March, 11 months before the courtroom, when I noticed Adrian's phone light up on the kitchen counter with a text preview I wasn't supposed to see. "Can't wait for Aspen. Don't tell R I told myself it was nothing, a work trip, an assistant. I'd been married 12 years. I wasn't the type to spiral over a 6-word text. 2 weeks later, I noticed he'd started taking calls in the garage with the door shut. I told myself it was the Series C funding round. Companies get quiet before big announcements. In May, I found a hotel charge on a card I still technically had access to, a joint card from before the twins were born that neither of us had bothered to cancel. The Broadmoor, Colorado Springs. 2 nights, Adrian had told me he was in Chicago that week for a logistics conference. My hands were actually shaking when I called the hotel. A front desk clerk named Denise confirmed the reservation was under Adrian Hollies' 1 room, checked in with a guest. She wouldn't give me a name, she didn't have to. I confronted him that night in the kitchen, twins asleep upstairs. He didn't even bother denying it with any real effort. "You're being paranoid," he said. "It was a work retreat, with Paige." His silence answered for him. "I want to tell you I left that night. I didn't. I told myself we could fix it, that 12 years and 2 sons were worth 1 more conversation, 1 more counseling session, 1 more chance. I booked us an appointment with a marriage therapist, doctor. Renata Cho, who had a warm office in Falls Church with a white noise machine humming outside the door so the waiting room couldn't hear you cry. Adrian went to 2 sessions. In the second one, Dr. Cho asked him directly whether he intended to end the affair. He looked at his watch and said he had a board call in 20 minutes. He never came to a 3rd session. I told myself even then that I could still salvage something. That's the part people never understand from the outside, how long you can keep negotiating with a house that's already on fire just because the furniture still looks familiar. In July, 6 weeks after the failed therapy, I found the second crack, and this one I couldn't rationalize away no matter how hard I tried. Owen came home from a weekend at his father's new apartment. Adrian had moved out for a while, saying we both needed space to think. Then Owen asked me in the calm, matter-of-fact voice only an 8-year-old could manage whether Paige was going to become his new mom. I kept my expression steady. I asked what made him think that. Dad said she's really good with kids, he replied. He said maybe one day. I remember standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in my hand, and in that exact moment, staring at a pot of pasta I'd completely forgotten about. I decided I was done being caught off guard. Surprise had become a luxury I couldn't afford anymore, not with 2 little boys watching my face for signs that their world was still safe. That night, I called Priya for the first time. Not to ask for advice, only to find out how much a consultation would cost and how soon she could meet me. She said Thursday. I told her I'd be there Tuesday. That was the beginning of the quiet work. The moment I stopped trying to save my marriage and started protecting my sons, and if I was honest, myself. Priya was a family law attorney from Alexandria with 17 years of experience in matrimonial law. She carried a leather folio, took careful notes, and never needed to raise her voice to command a room. I told her everything, the trust, the patents, the ownership split, 18% versus 62%, numbers Adrian had never questioned because he'd never had a reason to. He doesn't know, I said. Priya looked up from her legal pad. He doesn't know his wife actually owns his company. He knows I have money, he's just never asked where the company's true ownership sits. Why would he? I'm only the wife who got lucky. She didn't quite smile, but her expression sharpened. Then we don't show our cards, she said. Not yet. Beside Adrian sat Paige, not even pretending to keep a professional distance, her hand occasionally brushing his sleeve. At 9:42, Judge Diane Aukaffer, known for having no patience with theatrics, asked where I was. Adrian checked his watch. She's never respected anyone's time. Paige laughed. I heard about that later because I wasn't in the courtroom yet. Then the doors opened, and I walked in with Samuel's hand in my right and Owen's in my left. Wearing a plain coat and carrying only a manila envelope, I said, the boys wanted to come. Their father has been telling them I abandoned this family. I want them to hear the truth. Adrian's lawyer argued that Adrian deserved primary custody because of his wealth, home, and business, while I had only a modest rental. When Judge Aukaffer asked who represented me, I replied, I represent myself for this part. I handed the judge a sealed envelope. I'm not challenging the prenup. But it's only valid if the financial disclosures underneath it were truthful. Mr. Hollies has claimed ownership of things that were never his. Inside were patents, shareholder agreements, and trust documents. The judge's expression changed as she read them. Who founded Hollies Transit Systems? She asked. I did, Adrian answered. And who created the routing software? There was no team, I said. I built the first version years before we married. The judge held up a patent. Creator Mara Winslow. Who is that? Me, my maiden name. Silence filled the courtroom. She continued reading. The Winslow Venture Trust owns 62% of the company. Ms. Lane, do you control that trust? Yes, Adrian stared at me. You let me believe I owned the company. You owned 18% when we married, 11% now. The rest was never yours. I then submitted a flash drive containing company records, internal emails, and a recorded strategy meeting. I also revealed $180,000 in unexplained transfers to Crestline Advisory Group. The recording played. Nobody spoke when it ended. Judge Aukaffer denied Adrian's request for primary custody, ordered the boys to remain with me, and referred the financial evidence for possible fraud investigation. Adrian looked at me. You planned this. I waited, I replied, because I kept hoping you'd remember our sons were watching too. 11 days later, the Hollies Transit Systems Board unanimously removed Adrian as CEO. His law firm dropped him, Paige resigned, and prosecutors expanded their investigation into the company's finances. Months later, the court granted me primary custody, with Adrian receiving supervised visitation. One day, Samuel asked, "Did you always know you owned the company?" "I always knew," I said. "I just never thought it mattered as long as we were a family. Does it matter now?" I smiled sadly. "It matters because your dad forgot that you and your brother were the only things that truly mattered." I never needed to prove I owned anything else. He squeezed my hand a little tighter, and some days that's the only verdict that matters.